Hello there, and welcome to Thank the Maker, a podcast about heroes, princesses, scoundrels, hokey religions, ancient weapons, and all things Star Wars. I'm Adam Russell.
Hey, I'm pointing. My name is Nick. What's up?
Hey guys, it's Mike Forrester, and we got a special guest here today, which is very exciting. And I'm personally looking forward to asking a lot of questions about lots of things because we're a big fan of his work. So, Kai Patterson, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, it's always like awkward to me when we bring somebody on. I've listened to a lot of guests on other podcasts that I listen to, and there's like a 10-minute, like the hosts are riffing with each other and everyone's vamping, and then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, this person's been sitting here on YouTube not saying anything, but awkwardly sitting there. So I just want to get that out of the way right up front. I appreciate that. Let's just get him on, have him part of the discussion, get it going.
Yeah, these Bush League podcasts, these little like amateur podcasts like Smartless and stuff, you know.
Like, come on, guys, get it together. Get the
JK.
Conversation going.
I love how they call it out, though. How just constantly, how someone's just been sitting there awkwardly, like, come on, get to it. So anyway, we're almost as good as Smartless.
Get to the chorus. Nick, did you go to Galaxy's Edge today?
I did not go to Galaxy's Edge today. I went to my first Oogie Boogie's Bash yesterday.
What is that?
I mean, it's like a Halloween party in California Adventure.
Okay.
I wouldn't like. Hey, it's like any other. It's like Star Wars night where you're like, "What did I pay for?" Okay, you know, you leave at the end of the night and you're like, The lines were shorter.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
But I don't know.
So what's the big draw on that?
Couldn't tell you. I like going to Star Wars night. Yeah, I like going to Star Wars night because you're surrounded by Star Wars fans. So if you're a big Halloween person, I think the big draw to me that I could take away would be being able to wear a Halloween costume to Disney California Adventure.
Sure.
Other than that, I feel like their production is like pretty subpar. Like there's photo ops that I'm like, this is like theater group props, you know, like photo ops, you know, like there weren't a lot of like, they didn't stray from Disney Halloween music, which I'm like, just play all Halloween music, you know, like, cause you kept hearing the same for like, it was 6 to 11. So for 5 hours, you just heard kind of the same, like 10 songs, I would say.
Like you work at Journeys.
Yeah. I'm like,
God,
like
just cycling.
This is a premium ticket, you know, and I just don't feel like you're getting another draw, which again costs them nothing. Is there was, I think, 12 spots in California Adventure where you could trick or treat.
Oh.
And then you get there and it's basically a Disney queue, like a Disney line that has like 4 buckets with cast members handing out candy. And I'm like, I guess I'm doing this all night because candy's expensive this time of the year.
True. So
I made that my thing to like fill up my bag with Skittles and Snickers and stuff.
Right. Bob
so I'm gathering
hates
that
this
it doesn't.
one hack.
Yeah.
So I'm gathering that it doesn't hang with Universal Studios Halloween thing at all.
I don't even think it's trying to necessarily because there's nothing scary or haunted house or you know. They don't have the particular IP to make it like spooky.
You know what they could do? They could do an actual murder at the Haunted Mansion if you just go over to.
I think that's kind of how they try to differentiate it. How like at Disney, they're like, "This is Halloween. We're going to give you candy," and then at Universal, they're like, "We might kill you."
Could be a murder.
There's you literally like, we're not afraid to make you the next subject of Hostel 7.
Yeah,
and we will do that, right? So
yeah, people like it. They add more and more every year. Like the first one was in August, the first Oogie Boogie Bash. So I think if you're a Disney and Halloween person, it's probably fun to go. But the same way it would be if you're like a Star Wars fan to go to a Star Wars night. But I do tend to think that like I'm not burning down the house to go to a Star Wars night anymore. Like kind of know what I'm going to get, you know?
Yeah.
The one year where they finally had Bo-Katan's throne, or not finally, but like the year after Bo-Katan had a throne in Mandalorian, they had it. And I was like, I'm a big enough Star Wars fan to buy a Star Wars night ticket just so I could sit in that throne, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's important to me.
Yeah.
I do get
well, I'm keeping it Halloween right here with this Roosevelt's spooky season Star Wars shirt.
It's a
When you
classic
guys-
I love
at
it.
this point.
Keeping
It's
it super orange in my whole area here somehow.
Yeah, it's a nice.
I live in
amber.
Orange.
Yeah, that's true.
That's connection.
That's true. That's good.
Nailed
That's
it.
good. That's good.
Do you guys mess with these? Sorry, Kai, this is total.
Kai, you're putting up with us,
it.
man. We appreciate you.
Do you guys mess with these polos at all?
I play golf.
The
in them,
breakfast
man.
balls? Yeah,
They're
yeah.
awesome.
I like them.
I like them.
I don't play golf, but I still wear them.
They look comfortable in my closet.
Well, I went. It is a little jarring when I go to play golf and someone's like, "Oh, that's funny," because I have all the head covers.
Oh yeah.
But I have like prequels head covers, and I have like original trilogy head covers. And so then they're like, "Oh, that's cool, dude. You have the head covers of Star. Oh, and you have a Star Wars tattoo. Oh, and your shirt is Star Wars. Your hat also is Star Wars." And I'm like, "Wait till you see the ball marker. It's also Star Wars." So people are like, "Okay, we get it. You've seen the movies. That's nice."
You're familiar.
But the breakfast ball stuff, if you play golf, is a complete gag. It's awesome. I've given a lot of head covers to people, and my new thing is actually getting some of my breakfast balls polos. And when I go to tournaments and I see someone that either has like another Roosevelt shirt or something, I always try to hook them up.
Nice.
That's my thing.
Very nice.
Let's play golf. Let's do it.
All right, so let's not play golf right now. Let's talk about Star Wars.
We can do that.
So Kai is here to talk about his edit of the Ahsoka series, which we talked about last week. We broke it down. Kai, if you listened last week, you will know, or if you've seen it, took the Ahsoka series, cut it down to a 2.5-hour feature film length, did the same thing for the Obi-Wan series, I don't know how long ago. What's it been now? A year and a half? 2 years?
Yeah, about a year and a half, I think.
So, like I said, we broke down the whole thing last week, and the thing we kept saying over and over is how big of a process this thing was, and like the amount of work you've put into this thing, and not just doing the edit, but also all the other social media stuff and the other YouTube content, the trailers, everything. So you really you went all in, and you've kind of made this your thing, but you are, you're not just some dude who got a copy of Adobe Premiere and started chopping things up. You're a filmmaker yourself. You live in Southern California. You live in the LA area. So give us a little background about yourself and your experience in your day-to-day in filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, it all started when I was a little child, and I think a lot of people have heard this story now, but I was watching Jurassic Park at 5 years old, and I was like convinced that I was going to be a paleontologist. But then the more that I like
Lisa Frank for little girls, I get it. Yeah.
The more that I like really thought about why I liked Jurassic Park so much, the more I realized that it was like the storytelling and the filmmaking. And I'm like, as a 5-year-old, I'm watching the behind the scenes, I'm watching like all of a sudden ILM becomes like my dream job. I'm like, I want to make movies. I want to put people in a place that feels so real, even though it's not. And so ever since then, I've always been the film guy. I would ask my teachers if I could do video essays instead of regular essays. And
Dope.
so I've always been obsessed with movies and TV and, anything storytelling, I love. And so I made some of my first major short films in college that I am like really, really proud of. And then after college, I moved out to LA. And I worked on a couple of features. I did some, PA stuff, some second AD stuff. Just worked on, features and commercials. And then eventually I took a job doing video editing and video recording for a podcast. And I worked there for about a year and a half. And then I moved on to my own work and kind of doing more freelance visual effects work. And then also that's when I started to do these fan edits as well. But yeah, it's been an incredible ride, and I couldn't ask for anything better.
I love that.
I'm with you on the dinosaurs and discovering behind the scenes and what it takes to make a movie. I mean, my first long before music, it was science for me, and it started with dinosaurs. So I'm with you there. Jurassic Park was the only book as a kid I read more than once that I wasn't required to, and behind the scenes stuff. I mean, in the 90s, it was that show Movie Magic that was on. I don't know, it was on cable or something. What it was on, you can still find it on YouTube. Yeah, so I'm with you. And even as a musician, the way my band got signed was from a sort of an EPK, like a video that we made. It wasn't from a demo CD or like, it was long before everything was online. So it was a VHS tape of us, like of our live shows, and then, like, kind of a, lifestyle thing. So I'm fully with you. That's dope.
Thank you. Yeah. I think one of my favorite things in honestly, I think Jurassic Park kind of like changed my whole life.
Yeah.
I think I've even become like obsessed with storms because of Jurassic Park. Like I remember as like a kid, I would like go out into my mom's car at night if it was raining, and I'd be like, I have to be in this car because it's like Jurassic Park, and
Yeah.
there's going to be a dinosaur that comes out of nowhere, and so it really did become an obsession with me. And then also Star Wars at a very young age too. I remember watching the behind the scenes for all those and just being like awestruck by what George Lucas was able to accomplish.
So when it comes to doing a project like this where you reimagine something, I mean, I guess we could go back to Obi-Wan and ask, when did you first have the idea to put this into to put Obi-Wan into a feature film format, cut it down to that time?
Mm-hmm.
And was that just the direct inspiration to go ahead and do it with Ahsoka even before, the show dropped? What kind of motivated you to get the whole thing started?
Yeah. With Obi-Wan, I was watching it, week to week. Very, very excited. Obi-Wan's one of my favorite characters of all time. So it was, and getting Ewan McGregor back in the role was just such a treat. So I was really, really
Definitely.
excited. And each episode that went by, I'd be like really like psyched about what was going on, but there were just a few things that I was like, I don't know, like if I vibed with that, and I would watch with my fiance, and she's also a huge Star Wars fan too. So we would like kind of talk back and forth about like what we think worked and what didn't, and so by the end of the show, there was like something left in me that I was like a little unsatisfied, and I was like, the bones of a really great movie are here, but it felt like it was stretched into a show, and now that was before the headlines came out that that's exactly what happened, that
Right.
it was a movie and they stretched it into a show. So I feel like I could feel that right off the bat, and in talking with my fiance and just figuring out what we liked and what we didn't, I was kind of like, maybe I'll just like see what I can do, and I just kind of started playing around with edits. I didn't set out to make a movie, but and same with like my Ahsoka edit too. The way I start is I just like lay out the whole show into my timeline, and I just cut. I just, from beginning to end, I cut things that either don't keep the story moving along or don't move the plot forward. And it just so happened that when I was done with Obi-Wan, it hit that like 2.5 hour mark, and so I was like, okay, well there we go. That's a movie right there. And then I posted on TikTok and I just said like, hey, these are some of the changes that I made and this is what I did. If anyone would care to see it, let me know. I truly didn't think anything of it. I had some popular TikTok videos at the time, but I didn't think that like, I mean, none of them had to do with Star Wars. So I thought this is a totally wrong audience to post on TikTok for. And then it went viral, and the next day people were tagging me in stuff, and they were like posting on social media, and they were saying like, hey Kai, do you know that like Variety wrote an article about you? And I was like, wait, what? And I literally like found out, like everybody else, that there were these articles that were coming out about me on Variety and Entertainment Weekly and all that, and it was really, really insane. And so people were basically just hounding me to drop the movie. And I went through a few different ways that I dropped the movie, but most of them got taken down, which makes sense. And then I finally found a way to just kind of have it be more of a download on my website. And I encourage everyone to be a Disney Plus subscriber. I know it's the honor system, but I really do hope that, and I figure that a lot of people that are Star Wars fans they're already subscribed to Disney Plus, and they're already, no matter what they think of the content, they're going to be supporting Disney, because ultimately we all want more Star Wars content. So yeah, that's kind of the story on the Obi-Wan edit.
Dude, is there any part of you that feels like, or has any awareness of the idea that the popularity of, and like the kind of viral nature of your Obi-Wan edit could possibly have something to do with your name? Do you know what I'm getting at here?
No.
So hearing the Patterson cut,
Okay.
it just immediately sounds familiar. It sounds like, oh, I should know about this. Because in my head, at least as like an old person, the Patterson film, the Bigfoot sighting, the fake, it's like there's this like kernel of something deep in my subconscious. I'm like,
familiarity.
Yeah, the Patterson cut. I think I know about that, and then it just sticks. And then you go Google it, and then you watch it. I wonder if there's like some like buried deep in everyone's cultural zeitgeist subconscious, thing that helped it go viral.
It's actually funny because the early articles that were on like Variety and Yahoo News and stuff,
yeah,
they actually had misspelled my name, so they called me Peterson. So I think like a day or two later, I was able to find the one of the editors on Instagram, and I was like, hey, you spelled my name wrong in your articles, and they were like, oh, sorry, and then they changed it. But no, I that's funny because I actually do like, I mean, I love all things like cryptids and everything like that. I'm like, I don't know if I'm a believer, but I'm definitely like, I just love anything that's got like that spooky vibe and ghosts and all, I love all that stuff. So I've been aware of the Patterson film for a long time, and I do have a script that I'm working on that's actually a Bigfoot movie. So I thought that would probably be a funny film to come out, and people would be like, "Wait, is that the same guy?"
Nice,
but
the son of the guy who saw Bigfoot. Yeah, I mean, I think just there's a certain amount of like prestige and like almost authority to saying just the term, like the something cut, because of like the Schneider cut or whatever, it's like, I feel like those three words or whatever, just has, I'm like, I don't know who that is, but should I, like that sort of thing.
The Snyder cut was like very much in the zeitgeist at that point.
Sure.
And so I think that, because when I first made my TikTok, I was just like, hey, I made this cut of Obi-Wan. I never called it the Patterson cut until people in the comments were like, release the Patterson cut. And then I embraced it after that point.
Yeah.
But
now it's like a brand
it is
for
funny.
You.
Do you think there's like, Kai, from your perspective of being a filmmaker, this modern model of, like Zack Snyder has kind of become his own, I've probably said this with other close friends, but like he's kind of in a way become his own worst enemy in terms of like shooting too much story, or like however his films are pitched, where it's like, the Snyder cut is awesome. And then I wonder, is the audience changing enough that, they wouldn't have sat through a 3.5 hour superhero movie, when the argument would be it should have been 2 movies. The studio doesn't want to take a risk on it, but once the stuff is filmed, then you're paying for editing and special effects. But there's also a request that you go with for a director that's like, hey, I have to make a 2.5 hour movie here, 3 hours at this point. Because I remember being all of us in the 90s, if a movie was over 2 hours long, you were like, yo, this must be amazing, because hour and a half. When are you gonna pee though, dude? Yeah, hour and a half is the sweet spot, right? And so like when you see how movies are done at this point, and we're Netflix changed our ability to both pay attention and also be able to consume larger amounts of content, because previously HBO was kind of the king of making serialized long form stories, but then Netflix comes out and all of a sudden people are like, I got no problem binging a show. But with a movie, we have this weird pushback against a movie that's over 3 hours long, right? It's like kind of a thing. So from your perspective, when it comes to, judging the audience, like you're like 2.5 hours, that's my sweet spot. Do you kind of think like something like the Snyder Cut where they shoot too much movie for one movie? What are your thoughts on that, especially as someone who's had to really kind of whittle down a lot of story into a digestible amount of time for a modern film?
Yeah, totally. I can't talk too much about Snyder in particular because I do have a personal connection. So
Okay.
he's great. He's great.
Sure.
I love him. But I will say that I think that hitting over 2.5 hours, hitting kind of more that 3 hour mark, I think really is. I don't know if every filmmaker wishes that they could do that, but I think that there is something there where like the studio is like truly they're an hour and a half to 2 hours. They're like, that's a feature film, and if you're a nobody director, that's going to be your slot.
Right.
If you're a nobody director, an hour 30 is really your slot. If you've made a couple of features, they'll give you 2 hours, but really that like past 2.5 hour mark is
You got to be Scorsese at that point.
yeah, you got to have a name.
Sure.
You got to
Right.
be Nolan.
Yeah.
And so I think that if your name has that much weight that a studio will let you do that, I think you've done something right. Honestly, I do
Yeah.
think that there is some merit to that for sure. But on the other hand, I do think that as an audience member, I would like things to stay around 2.5 hours. I think that's definitely hitting the like a little too close to being too long.
Sure.
So also in that regard, as a filmmaker, I'm trying to truncate stories, with these show lengths. I'm trying to get them down to 2.5 hours because it's like a learning exercise for me
Sure.
to see how to structure, a good paced movie in 2.5 hours. There was a lot of people in my Discord server who were like, why not just do 3 hours? Why not, like if the story calls for it, like why not just do it? And I really am just like strict about that 2.5 hours. I want, the average viewer to go 2.5 hours. Yeah, I could do that. I'll watch
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
Because I think once you start getting like 2 hour 45 or 3 hours, people go, I don't know if I want to sit down for that. So just giving myself the practice and giving
Yeah, it's restraint.
audiences,
Mhm.
yeah. And so, but on the other hand, I do think that being able to have your name give you a 3 hour time slot for studios, I think that's impressive. I think that's really impressive. And
Yeah.
maybe one day I'll be able to, I'll have a name like that and I can make a 3 hour movie too.
Sure.
But for me, I would need to make sure that those 3 hours were used perfectly. And I think that, um, a movie, a lot of Nolan movies, he does kind of flirt with that time frame, and I think he really uses his time well. Like he's a filmmaker that uses his runtime effectively, and I think that's always what I'm striving to do is use the runtime effectively.
Sure.
I feel like with
Do-
him too, like it usually works in like non-IP.
Non-linear.
So there's
Oh,
probably
non-IP.
non-linear for sure, but like there's no IP that would necessarily have any built-in knowledge. When you watch Star Wars, you assume that there's a certain core of people who have a certain amount of knowledge to where you don't have to have a lot of exposition. But a Nolan
Yeah.
film are
Yeah.
barely, you could barely follow him to begin with. So there's got to be like a lot of exposition in his movies, which probably adds a lot of time.
There
That's
there
true.
was a moment though, right in the middle of Oppenheimer, where I was like, dude, you could have stopped here and made this part one. Like the first hour is so exhausting because it's so breakneck. You could have slowed that down, made it an hour and 40, and then like basically all the lead up to when he starts the project. You know what I mean? So there are like, and the reason I bring that up is because in analyzing your cut of Ahsoka, I didn't go back and do the math, but I feel like there is a version where you could do 2 films, each like an hour and 20, and preserve all of the different plot lines. Especially with the way Thrawn shows up at episode 6 or whatever it is. There's something there which we can talk about later.
No, I do think you're right there, because my first edit of Ahsoka was like 3 hour 15. So that would cut perfectly as 2 hour 30-ish movies.
Yeah.
There was actually right at the midsection of the movie is when Ahsoka falls into the world between worlds, and that would actually be a perfect place to stop a first part movie.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I think you have something there. Yeah.
I think too. This is where it gets into kind of like the politics of the game that we're all playing, which is, unfortunately, these studios are all owned by a large entity that wants to make as much money as they can, to take zero risk, and that's not being negative. That's literally just assessing how business is run in the entertainment industry, right? So you kind of have, and I go back to, we had talked about this a little bit on the podcast last week, where you're looking at something and going, would a studio take a risk on, besides Netflix, who basically promises, and I'm kind of going back to Zack Snyder on this, but it's like they told Zack, they're like, you're going to make 2 Rebel Moons. Like, we just know right there we're making an agreement. Are there 3? Are there 2? Or are there 3? I think there's 2, right?
There's 2 right now.
Yeah.
There's 2, but there's a 3rd coming.
I'm not sure what the future holds for that franchise, but I think it was supposed to be more like a 4-part thing.
Oh, okay. So like, but regardless, unless you sign that deal, like, and like you're saying, if you're kind of a, one-off director, they're looking at going singular stories with, if they have IP, that's great if they can do it. But even, even the new Alien, it's like, they're like, let's just do this one movie and see how it works out, right? So I can also see how the studios are like, someone like Ahsoka, who has a cult following. You have people who are going to come see it, but will we take a risk on a 2-part story, right? So I can understand that. But then I go back to something like Watchmen, which already had, again, same interested core group of people. And I actually think, that's probably one of my favorite Zack Snyder movies. The comic book fans are going to get mad at me, but I actually like the way that he chose to end it. And then you go into the director's cut, which is even longer. And for someone like me who loves the movie, now we're adding in the Black Freighter, we're adding in all these other parts that I think make the director's cut better, versus there's times where I know it's sacrilege, but like Lord of the Rings director's cut, I know you can't not watch it like that. But I'm also like, these movies are so long. And I don't remember.
Like, you need a catheter to watch the movie.
I mean, you're at some point where you're just like, yeah, I understand why the studio is like, we're not gonna put the audience through this. So I think there's, when you're looking at the business of things, I think that also works as creative restraint too, which I know is a very hard thing to do when you have this idea of being like, I got to tell the story completely. And you're sitting here going, we shot all this great footage, and what do we do? And that even happens in the show. Like, Ahsoka had a great, Mandalorian season 3, I think, had a whole TIE interceptors, Mandalorian Fang fighters that had a whole thing, and that got cut, I think, in the finale.
Wow.
And because there's a Lego that came out that had TIE Interceptor versus Fang Fighter, and I don't even think we saw Fang Fighter in the show, I think we only saw Bo-Katan's gauntlet, but we really didn't see a lot of that. And I think, and the rumor has it that there was a scene that they just thought didn't work, or it got cut. So, because there's toys of the Mandalorian Fang Fighter that are not based in the Clone Wars version. It's full on Mandalorian version. So it goes to show you that even the studio that owns the IP, they really only choose how much money they want to spend on it, can go, yeah, we're going to cut that, but I'm like, you have no restraint. Like, if anything, Star Wars fans are like, I'd be happy with a 40+ minute episode of The Mandalorian, because we're always kind of hovering around 35 minutes to 39 minutes, and people are always like, now the credits, oh my God.
Yeah,
so,
we touched on it last week, just kind of backed our way into it. We're like, it really would be good for certain entities to almost, I think what I said last week was, how great would it be if the Patterson cut was in theaters and then a month later, 2 months later, the extended Ahsoka series is on, like kind of almost reverse engineer it, but have two different pushes. Like, I feel like I would say I know not why every movie doesn't have an extended director's cut for budget reasons. But if you actually have a multi-tiered marketing plan to be like, this movie, the abridged version, which is still 2.5 hours long, is in the theaters, and 2 months later, there is a broken down 8-piece series extended for the super nerds or the people who maybe just found out about the movie and want to know more. And then you market that. Like, I feel like if they really wrapped their head around it, the budget wouldn't be the issue,
Well,
like, I feel like they could do that.
James Cameron already has wanted to do that for a long time. And I mean, with his relationship with Disney, I'm sure he could make it happen. But he's talked about, after Way of Water came out, he was like, I have like 8 hours of this movie. And he's like, I'm going to release the theatrical version, but he wants to do a mini series on the same story, but in a larger format. So, and that even happened with Hateful Eight as well. Hateful Eight was, a theatrical cut, and then I think a couple of years later it came out as a mini series. So I think that there is a market for that, and I think that, I don't think that would be a terrible idea for Disney to start adopting, because a lot of people do love coming to the theaters. I mean, there's nothing like filling a room full of Star Wars nerds and having that classic fanfare start, that's just heaven to me. And so to get to experience something with all the fans next to you, and then come in and, subscribe to Disney Plus, and you have to subscribe to Disney Plus for X amount of weeks because there's X amount of episodes, and then they can just make more off of that same story. I think that would be a great business decision.
Yeah.
It seems like something that is like a happy medium. Maybe it's a transitional thing, or it's something to like at least experiment with, because we talk about this all the time, how everyone went all in on streaming, not just because of the technology change, but the pandemic. And then there's been this big correction, they call it the big, the great streaming correction, dialing back because everyone just spent everything to try to catch up with Netflix. And now we're at this place where, they all did the math early, like what it would take to just fully go streaming, how many subscribers they would have, how much they would have to charge, yada, yada, yada. And it was bonkers, and they didn't do that. And we've been starved of Star Wars theatrical content for so long. Like, I think it's worth giving it a shot, because it's not like they couldn't double dip as well. I mean, at some point 6 months later, they could put the whole 9 hours worth of content also in the theater and be doing marathon screenings and all that kind of stuff, just like they do when you can go see the full Skywalker saga before the first 8 movies before the Rise of Skywalker comes out, kind of thing.
Oh, they like when they
it's not unheard of.
When they re-released the Phantom Menace, and it was like it was like a top, it was like a top 5 movie in America. Like, this 20-year-old movie that people used to be like, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. This like top 5 movie in America, right? But I'm with you on that. I think that there certainly is something. I think they try to tease a little bit of that, because when Mandalorian and Grogu comes out, that will be 7 years since we've sat in a movie theater together and watched a Star Wars movie, right? So I think it's sad. It hurts. And I think that there's something about when they're doing these shows, how they're kind of doing like the first 2 episodes in the theater, and you can, they have AMC partnerships and all this kind of stuff, which stinks for anybody who lives in a small market like me. You're just like, well, please don't spoil it. But I think that, when you're looking at something, Kai, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because Marshall Lucas was arguably the reason why Star Wars ended up working. And for people who don't know that story, Marshall Lucas was George's, at the time, I think his wife or girlfriend, his wife at the time. Right? you know, she was working as a producer, and then I think she sat with most of the edit to put that together because George had gotten so overwhelmed with the story and just wasn't sure what kind of executive, executive decisions to make. So for people who I think have an idea of what an editor does for a film, because next to the director, the editor is almost like kind of after once production is over and then we get into the story of it. And I think for people who were watching the Patterson cut of Ahsoka or Obi-Wan, they understand those choices that an editor has to make sure that the story flows. There's multiple cuts and takes you have to take. But how would you describe like what an editor does for a film for someone who's kind of like, you know, what are these terms?
Yeah, I'd say the editor is the second storyteller after the director. Um, I mean, I think people, if you've watched my edited versions of the shows, I think you can understand how powerful editing can be and how much it can change a story, and for better or for worse. And I think that uh, the editor really does have full control of what happens in the story. Obviously they have to play in the sandbox of what was filmed and all those, all the takes, but George Lucas himself was always saying that he felt way more comfortable in the editing room. Once everything was done, now he could really craft the real story, because you don't have a story when you have 200 hours of a film, of a bunch of takes. That's not a story. The editor is the one that crafts all of that into a story, and they obviously have the script in front of them, and they have the director's notes of what takes were the best and stuff. But I think what is different about what I've been doing with these movie edits is I have the privilege of being one person. I don't have any higher ups above me. I don't have a director telling me they want it
Sure.
this way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have Disney saying, no, you need to hit that 35-minute mark for the episode. Like I have the privilege of being able to control it with my own vision.
Sure.
Obviously, I still have I have even less privilege of like the editor who has all the raw footage and can really make a full story with it. So I have to play with what we already have, but I do understand that like what I do is something that even the editors at Lucasfilm could never do. They
Sure.
couldn't just make executive decisions based on their own idea of taste and then not run it by anybody. So I have a lot of privilege in that sense, and I always try to make sure I check that privilege, because it is important for everyone to understand that like what I do isn't possible in the studio world. It just is not possible.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And is your role to also be, I mean, do you have to feel like if you're in this case, and I don't know anyone who's a Hollywood editor, or at least I know a lot of directors who do their own edits and their own cinematography, and more so like kind of one person shows, but is it also your job to act a little bit impartial to saying what is the audience going to take from this, or are you ideally trying to be aligned with the director of saying this is what the director wants to give to the audience, but are you kind of trying to, you know what I mean? Are you trying
yeah
to
like
try to be a viewer at the same time?
be have your foot in both worlds?
Yeah, I think when you are a professional editor who does have a boss above you, hopefully you were hired because your boss saw something in your work that impressed them, and that they trust that you have the right intentions for the story. So that aside, once you're kind of in the edit room, I think a lot of it comes down to just like instinct and taste.
Sure.
And then when the first round of notes comes in, then I think that you put on the hat of like, okay, what is somebody else thinking while watching this? Because obviously, part of art is sharing it. And then once it's interpreted by somebody, then the art can take on a different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you sit there in the edit room and you've made all these choices for the story, and then either the director comes in or a producer or somebody comes in and is watching it, and then they tell you their honest thoughts about how the story went, then you go, okay, wow, I didn't even see that. Or like, oh, dang it, they didn't get what I was trying to do. That means I probably didn't do it to the degree that I needed to.
Mhm.
And this happens with me even like when I'm, I just wrote and directed a short film that was like a Twilight Zone inspired short film. And I can't tell you how many different versions of that film I have on my desktop, because I would export it and then I would send it to my producer, and then they would say, I don't know, like, I don't really get this part. I don't know, and I'd be like, oh man, that's so weird, because like in my head, I had it perfect.
Sure.
But to a different,
Right.
to another brain, it's not that way. And so you do kind of have to take that into account. And I mean, I do that with these edits as well. I mean, my process is I sit down with my fiance after I'm ready, and then we watch it together, and then
Yeah.
I pick her brain about things. And there definitely been times where she's been like, the character said this, but later on in the story, you actually cut that section out. So shouldn't you go back and cut that
Yeah.
thing too? And I'm like, yeah, why? How did I
Yeah,
miss that?
You have
So
to keep this like mental inventory, and it's
yeah,
like having, I don't know if you ever go into Time Machine on your Mac where you can go back
hmm
and see like the stacks of like previous versions in your head. It's all there.
yes,
So it's so much easier to miss something because you're like, no, it makes perfect sense because so and so. And then you realize, oh, that's not there anymore. Or that's only that clear to me because I know the deeper context. But,
hmm
someone alluding to that earlier is actually pretty vague. And it's like, it's so hard to be objective, even in, the handful of stuff I've done. Like, I've done mostly documentary stuff myself,
mm,
aside from music video stuff and our recent short. And it's just, your brain just stops working like a normal brain at some point, because
hmm
you go to sleep and you wake up and your brain is still in Final Cut or Premiere or whatever, like, and you'll just be on these benders, and you lose the ability to be objective.
hmm
So, having a partner, somebody, whether it's, your fiance, your producer, whoever, is like so crucial. And even then, the the toughest part about this, that I know I can say confidently and, speak to this a little bit, um, you only have so many Legos in the box, so to speak.
hmm
You couldn't go do reshoots. You did a bunch of VFX to make certain things work,
hmm
but you only have so many pieces. You only have so many story bits to work with. So I guess this is like a two-part question. One, did you know, watching it the first time, kind of exactly what you would cut to cut it down? And when you went in, did you find that certain things that felt like it would be a given relied on other pieces that made it, like Nick mentioned last time, there's like this cascading effect of taking out one bit? Did you find
Yeah.
things that just would not work once you took out a thing that you assumed, like, oh yeah, that's got to go, kind of
hmm
scenario? Did you have those quite a bit?
yeah. Well, first part of your question, when I was watching it, I had no intention of making it into a movie.
Yeah.
I was really enjoying myself. Every episode that came out, I was like, there were a few things that I was like, oh, okay, that kind of dragged on here and there, but for the most part, I really, really did enjoy the Ahsoka show. And it wasn't until, after the last couple episodes came out, and I was like, you know, there was some things that dragged on in those last few episodes, and I could see a shorter version of it, but I knew that a majority of the show I really did like. So in my head, I was like, there's no way this could be 2.5 hours.
Mhm.
If I kept everything that I liked, it would probably be like a 4 hour cut.
Right.
And I think the show, without all the credits and everything, the content is about like 6.5 hours or something like that. So I knew that, it was going to be a very different process if for some reason I wanted to go in and make a movie out of it. And again, my thought was just like, like I just can't get it out of my head. Like I think there's a way to view this a little shorter. And so I just laid it out on my timeline, went through everything, and got it down to like a 3-hour, 15-minute cut. And I was like, well, now I've woken the beast, because now I want it to be a 2.5-hour movie. And that's when I started to do like the big story changes, like cutting out the whole star map subplot. That was in my 3-hour cut. But once I was like trying to figure out how to keep the story flowing and not have this weird, like, in the 3-hour cut, the star map subplot kind of gave it like a pre-climax, and then it went back down, and then had a second climax, and then it just was like the pacing was a little weird. And so when I figured out that I could bypass that star map section, that's why I was like, okay, the 2.5-hour cut is totally doable. And I didn't feel like we missed too much in that sequence, because really what happens is the good guys get the star map, the good guys fumble the star map, the bad guys have the star map, the good guys now try to go get the star map. So story-wise, you kind of end up in the same exact place that you were in the beginning. So that's why I was like, even though there were some really cool sequences and some great character development, like, I was really sad to lose some of the like interaction between like Shin and Morgan Elsbeth, where they kind of talk about the witches and how, Shin kind of has this weird feeling about witches, and Morgan Elsbeth is like, I'm a survivor, not a witch, or that part I was really sad to lose, because it's great characterization, but it no longer fit the flow of the story. And so your second question being, was there anything that I tried to edit out but realized like the cascading effects wouldn't work? I think one of those was kind of the zombie troopers at the end,
right.
where I didn't necessarily mind it. I think, and in my interpretation, I didn't cut out the fact that they are possessed troopers. In my interpretation, we just don't outright tell the audience that they're possessed, but it's kind of the same thing with like Marak. Like, we're never told, even in the show, we're never told that he was possessed by witch magic until he's killed and then explodes into this green mist. And then you're like, oh, there was some kind of witch magic there. But they never explicitly told you. So I was kind of just using that excuse in my own edit to be like, I don't need to show them revive these troopers. You can kind of surmise that, on your own. But that was one of those things where I cut some of the initial stuff with the troopers, but the end sequence where Sabine comes in and she saves her master by helping fight the troopers while she's fighting Morgan Elsbeth, I couldn't cut around that. I couldn't have Sabine come in heroically and then there's no troopers there. So what, she's supposed to start shooting at Morgan Elsbeth?
Right.
So that was one of those things where, like, for timing, it would have been great to cut out the troopers in general. And I like the idea that Thrawn was only using Morgan Elsbeth's resources, so he'd use the fighters that she brought in. He'd use Shin and Balin because she brought them in, but he's very like reserved in his own resources. But that was something that I couldn't fully cut. So there is that weird moment where out of nowhere troopers come and they start shooting and you're like, wait, where did they even come from?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you're in the story enough that it doesn't pull you out of the story. But that is one thing that I was like, I know what I'm doing here, and I know that it doesn't quite work, but I'm allowing myself some mistakes here and there.
Yeah, it's we talked about this a bit last week. I think it's the kind of thing, and I think this also applies to some stuff with Sabine, because this isn't just the Ahsoka series. It's called Ahsoka, but it's kind of like the book of Boba Fett. It isn't just Boba Fett, clearly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas Obi-Wan was a film idea that was stretched out, Ahsoka is all this Rebel Season 5 type stuff that had to be condensed down to 8 episodes. I mean, there's 12 episodes worth of stuff there probably to do it at the pace that Rebels or Clone Wars would have been done, in my opinion. So you're pruning different plants, you know? Like one is a bonsai tree that is meant to be pruned. The other one is like, the shit's supposed to be shaped like a ball. I don't know. Like, how do you make it shaped like a topiary or whatever? So there, I could just see it there, and there were certain moments, I guess being specific, where I could just see you kind of hitting a dead end and just having to concede to, this is the way it has to go.
And
if
that's
I'm going to
what,
cut this out, there are no other choices,
and that's where pickups would have came in, right? That's
Right,
where
yeah.
where
Totally.
you've got the rough edit, and you sit there and you go, does this flow? And then they call everybody back, which doesn't mean that trouble, doesn't mean that production is in trouble. That's always this thing. Every time it's like, oh, they got called back, and people are like, oh it must be the production's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. It's just literally for them to try to make a better movie. And then also, what does the studio want, right? Because we had talked about this on Fanboys. There was a lot of studio interference with that. I think we've seen many instances lately of studios kind of ham-fisting an opportunity to leave it open so we can have a sequel. Like, let's put more emphasis on this person because this character, this actor's hot. But it's interesting when you're talking about the Night Troopers, because I think that when the show came out, we were all curious about that, even in the way it was presented, because we didn't know if the troopers were already resurrected or if the idea was that they were willing to be, slayed in the line of battle and then they were resurrected. But then it didn't totally make sense in continuity, because the Death Troopers, when they get exposed,
Mm-hmm.
their skin is already like dead and decayed. So it almost had made, like, it looked like they had been dead for a long time. You know what I mean? And so like, I think there was a little bit of like confusion even on the first go around, that was like, it does seem like there was already like a little bit of editing that had to go on in that. If maybe there were some moments where, their Dathomirians are pulling up, the invasion of the Empire from Dooku days, where they brought all those troopers and said, you're part of our army now. But we didn't really get any of that. So I think in some ways you were kind of maybe answering some questions that were still lingering, using what you were kind of deducting from watching the show.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting when you're looking at it this hard, because I know that there's a podcast called The Rough Cut. You've heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
It's an editors focused podcast. And it has Dana and James and Roseanne, who are the three editors on Ahsoka, which none of them say that they're like huge Star Wars fans, but they've all worked with Lucasfilm many times. And so from their perspective, they're looking at it and like, does the story make sense? Yet here we are as super fans being like, well, that Death Trooper hasn't been seen since, Clone Wars,
Yeah.
And so like, we're looking at it in a completely different light than 95% of people. So it's interesting when you start making decisions like that, there is a small minority of people who are sitting here being like, I've never been so offended in my life.
Yeah.
What is he doing?
So Kai, was there anything, I know this is probably it's like a parallel question, what we've been talking about the last 10 minutes, but is there an example of something that cascaded to the point where you're like, oh, I have to do this, but now I have to change all of this other stuff? Is there like one specific example that you could think of?
I did have moments where I would cut things out, and later on in the editing process, I'd be like, oh man, like I kind of need that.
JK.
I think there were moments with Jason, and where I was like, he's really a side character, but he also has like kind of a big moment in the show where he is kind of the reason why Ahsoka is rescued, because he can hear through the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, in my own way, I was thinking Hera bringing a child into a battlefield situation, to me, kind of felt like a weird mother move. So I was kind of trying to figure out a way that maybe I could edit Jason out completely of that whole second half. But but he's too integral to the story.
Yeah.
And you know, I again, I'm not trying to like. I'm very aware of the other artists that have worked on these things, and you know, I don't want to. I don't want this kid to one day hear about the Patterson cut that completely cut him out, you know, and I just like that doesn't feel right to me. So I also was just looking at it from like what can we give to Jason that like still makes him feel like a really worthy character in this story, but also it is, you know, the name on the title is Ahsoka. Let's keep it as Ahsoka's story. So, you know, that whole end section where Jason is communing with, you know, the Force and hearing these things, I did end up cutting that, but I did have to like early on, I had to realize that he was such a big part of that ending portion of that episode that he had to stay. And I, you know, I think that Star Wars ultimately is for kids, and so seeing kids in Star Wars does feel really nice. So I think that also just like it feels good to have them in there, you know.
Agreed. Is
For
there
sure.
one question I have, because you have, since all this has come out, have you finished Star Wars Rebels yet, Kai?
I have not, and
Okay.
I know everyone has been
That's
berating me, but
how much have you seen thus far?
I've seen the first 2 seasons, and
Oh
then
man.
the rest of it I have like watched through like breakdown videos or
Okay.
highlight videos so
Okay.
that I can understand what's going on.
Okay. So yeah, because once you get to the Jedi Knight episode, that it's kind of lights out from there.
It is
Okay.
definitely more kid vibe than Clone Wars. Like
It's-
I'm with you on that. But
Well, especially season 1, I think what happened is I think they at least got some demographics to go, there's a lot of adults watching this show, so we can maybe, I mean, but then at the same time, we talked about this in our Rebels breakdown. They talk about genocide and weapons of mass destruction like the first 3 episodes. So like it's
Yeah.
like the animation seemed kiddie, but like the content was very Star Wars. But my question for you, as someone, the reason that I asked is, do you think Ahsoka would have benefited from some recap of the previous 4 seasons of Rebels? Would it have benefited from a 5-minute exposition on here's how we got to this point? Because we had talked about it a little bit of saying, you know, Filoni's approach possibly to not doing it was that he wants people to watch Rebels. He wants people to
Sure.
get interested enough to go back into the catalog and learn about it, but it's still taking a risk versus, you know, kind of saying, if you're new to the show, you know, again, in COVID, I watched Rebels before I watched Clone Wars. So
Oh wow.
Ahsoka shows up in Rebels, and I remember people being like, oh my gosh, she's Fulcrum. And I'm like, what's the big deal? And then going
Yeah.
back and being like, oh, what was I thinking? But, you know, do you think that would have benefited viewers to get some exposition as to who these characters were?
Yeah, actually my early idea, once I had decided that I was making this movie, my idea was that I did want to kind of shoot my own almost like short film intro to the show, and I wanted to like do a live action version of kind of the last scene with Ezra and the whales and Thrawn, because I think
Sure.
that scene itself is enough for the audience to understand what's going on, and so I think it would have been really really great to see some of that last bit of Rebels be live action, just
Sure.
to get everybody up to speed, because I think that story can be condensed so that you can gear up for Ahsoka and just be like totally in, you know. And I think it would have been really interesting if they did kind of what they did with Rogue One, where they have a scene that happens, you know, 10 years before the start of the story, just to get you in it and just to
Right.
have you understand. So I totally would have loved to have seen Ezra take out Thrawn with the whales in live action. That would have been awesome.
yeah, and I feel like we talked about this last week. they could have done something with the existing material. It just probably would have gone over weird for people who aren't into the animation at all, because before Obi-Wan, they did that sort of previously on kind of thing. And I think it probably helped a lot of people, and it was also very nostalgic. It set the tone, blah, blah, blah. But to do that with cartoons, you're immediately going to alienate probably 50% of the adult audience.
Right.
As stupid as that is, that's the reality. So
Yep.
they were kind of strapped.
It's true. Yeah, no, I think that it is a weird thing to mix those two types of viewing experiences. I mean, I also have watched, there's like a, ultimate cut of Revenge of the Sith that, adds in the last couple arcs of the Clone Wars. And I watched those and I think it's really, really interesting, but it also doesn't quite mesh. And it's because the styles are different. And so stylistically, you have your hands tied behind your back for, certain moments because you're doing it in live action. Whereas in a cartoon, you can do whatever you want. You can have Jedis doing their, jumping and crazy acrobatics and stuff. And you believe it because you're watching a cartoon, but then you see somebody do it in live action and it's a little off-putting. So the storytelling types are different. And I do think that if they had done a recap, like they did for Obi-Wan, but with Ahsoka, while like using the Rebels cartoon, I think it would have been really off-putting for a lot of people. And I don't know if it would have worked.
That's what I was thinking. If they did it in, the animated, we had talked about like the Tar Vizsla, like kind of telling the background of the Darksaber, or the mural has really cool art on
They
it.
could have fully done it in the mural style.
That's that's what I think. So,
like Hu Yang telling a little far, far away story.
It'd be amazing. It'd be amazing. And I understand that, animation isn't cheap either, but certainly I'm like, well, if there's someone who knows how to do animation, I think it's Disney. I'm just going to go out there and say it.
Totally.
But yeah, that was something that I was like, I understand it. I think it's pretty bold. But is that payoff there? You're kind of sitting here going, I think we are so far into Star Wars that it's intimidating for a lot of people to jump in, because then you're sitting there going, oh, did you like that? Like, did you like that one little piece? Well, guess what? Here's 95 more hours of it. So, it's just, I get it.
But I mean, I think one of the things that has been getting a really big response from my edits is the fact that I incorporated the Malachor set into live action.
Right.
And I think that that just proves that there are Rebels fans who would love to see a recreated scene from Rebels in live action. And so I do think, just like they did in Clone Wars season 7, they had, some sections where they redid some of the scenes from Revenge of the Sith, but in the animated Clone Wars style.
Right.
And I think you can do it the other way around too. I think you can pick some very pivotal scenes and make like a quick, like little vignette of story points that you need to know. And I think that would have felt really great watching that in live action right before Ahsoka.
Yeah, sure. There's so many. I mean, you said pivotal, but there's some of the best Star Wars ever in animation. So I don't think anyone would object to seeing it actually in live action, even if it is a vignette.
Well, Kai, we could talk for another hour about all this and just going so deep on the filmmaking and we didn't even get into VFX, but we should probably wrap up. Actually, I'll ask you one more thing and then we'll wrap up, and we'll do the bonus segment for patrons. You did a handful of VFX shots to make things work here. And I know you did some for Obi-Wan as well. Do you have a total number of VFX shots that you did? And is there anything in particular that was really challenging or something specific that you're really proud of?
Yes. So for Ahsoka, I'm not sure the count on Obi-Wan, because at that point I was just doing stuff for myself. So I never thought anyone would ever care to ask me that. But I knew that by the time Ahsoka was coming around, people would want to know that. So I kept count. For Ahsoka, there was 115 visual effects shots that I did.
Wow.
And that's on a spectrum probably from just like a simple comp to like actually building something for real, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So just the like Malachor sequence, that I think was about 26 shots.
Whoa.
So that was a lot of work. So that one I'm very proud of because I crafted that entire Malachor set just from watching that scene from Rebels over and over and over again, flipping back between my screens, creating this set in 3D using Blender. And once I started comping it in, I was like, oh man, like I think this works. And it was like really exciting.
Yeah,
But
sure.
also there's a scene that I had to truncate where at the end of the movie, the Thrawn sends out TIE fighters to attack the T6 shuttle. And so after Ezra makes his lightsaber and he comes up after Ahsoka and Sabine have had their kind of like talk to each other about, the relationship between a master and a student, then the TIE fighters come in and attack. And that's what, grounds the T6 shuttle so that they have to ride on the howlers to get to the to Thrawn's lair, basically.
Right.
So in order to cut that whole thing out, I had to have Hu Yang shot down earlier when everybody else is battling and he's being pursued by the fighter group.
Right.
So I had to completely create a whole new shot of it's wholly CG.
Well,
that I did where the fighters come in and they shoot down Hu Yang, and then so that's a total fabricated shot that I did.
Whoa.
And I'm very proud of it. And if you didn't notice, then I did my job right and it kept you in the story. So
nice.
That's great. I mean, I said this on the last, I brought this to everyone's attention, a month ago, that we should talk about it. And I watched the first half, like literally right up into the World Between Worlds. And I'm like, what? I can't think of one thing that I don't remember, like that is missing. I actually, up until we started to watch it and watch your trailer and stuff, I didn't realize that you added stuff. And it was like, seemed so flawless to me that I was like, this is really, really good. And I still think it's great. And now that I know to look for some things that you changed, I could tell. But at first, when I was watching it in like oh yeah, we're going to talk about this, let me throw on Ahsoka, I haven't watched the series in a couple months, I was like, this is flawless. Like, what is missing? How is it 2.5 hours? So great job. I loved it.
Well done. I have some specific questions that I'll ask you once we're off here, because I don't want to take away from. I'd rather have people go watch your full breakdowns, because you have a part one that's an hour and 40 minutes. You kind of go shot by shot, scene by scene.
I just finished my part 3 today. Finished editing
Nice.
it. It's like 3 hours, or part 2. It's like 3 hours and 15 minutes.
Sweet.
So it's a lot.
Yeah. So I'll put a link in the show notes. People should go check that out, because you're very, very thorough in that. So if you're at all interested in filmmaking, or you just want to see the breakdown, it's worth watching. Kai, thanks so much for hanging out with us again. Great job.
Thank you.
Super excited to see what you do next.
I had a great conversation, so I'll come on anytime.
Awesome. One last thing before we go, let people know where they can find you on social media and what your website is, because that's where the link is, of course.
Yeah. So you can go to kaipattersonfilms.com, and that should have everything I've ever done, short films, my fan edits, everything, as well as my social media. But if you're searching for me, I should just be at Kai Patterson Films on most social platforms. So there you go.
Awesome.
Love it.
The bonus segment for patrons, characters, is the category from the Kelly Knox chat pack, the Star Wars chat pack. The question is, who do you think is the bravest character in Star Wars? We'll talk about that in the bonus after show segment for patrons. Patreon.com/ThankTheMakerPod is where you can go to get access to that. Everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Patrons, thanks for being patrons. And until next time, may the Force be with you. If you enjoy Thank the Maker, you can support us by following and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Or you can support us directly at patreon.com/ThankTheMakerPod, where you can get access to our Discord server, exclusive content, exclusive merch, our recording live stream, and more. Our patrons quite literally make Thank the Maker possible.